It wasn't until I hopped on the roller coaster that was Persona 5 in 2019 that my adoration for video games as a medium of storytelling and entertainment skyrocketed to an entirely different level. From the calendar system that gave the player a sense of agency through day-to-day affairs, whether it was wage slaving at Big Bang Burger or unpacking layers of the cast's story through social links, P5 danced with realism to a degree that I've never seen before. What stacked onto this game was satisfying JRPG combat and demon fusion and collecting, which made me feel at home since I was well acquainted with another monster catching franchise. Given Strikers is an extension of Persona 5's influence, it's only natural for me to expect a preservation of that stylistic charm brought about by said Persona 5 in some respect, if not more. Spoiler, it does. This ended up being my highlight game of summer 2021. I mean, seriously, I could not put the game down from start to finish. Persona 5 Strikers only builds off of the foundation of Persona 5 and the Musou genre alike through interesting design choices within its gameplay, best described as a hybrid JRPG hack-and-slash title of sorts, which is most likely why it appealed to me in the way that it did, and I hope that it sparks your interest as well. For today's analysis, the PS4 version of Strikers played on the PS5 will be the source of all of our gameplay. Furthermore, there will be light spoilers on the first arc of this game as well as the narrative portion of this review, assuming that you know how Persona 5's storyline unfolds all the way up to its conclusion. With the stage finally set for the heist to begin, it's showtime! Each member of the original cast, not counting Futaba and Akechi, is playable with the addition of two new ones in Sophia and another who, although should be obvious, I won't bring up here. The characters all come packaged with signature skills unique to them alongside firearms of their choice because Second Amendment privileges, baby! Joker is the jack of all trades unit, carrying a variety of up to 10 personas that can be switched between and applied to whatever situation. Ryuji is a physical powerhouse that can charge moves for extra damage and toughen himself up to avoid flinching from enemy attacks. An is a balanced member stat-wise equipped with the ability to augment her whip with fire, debuff the enemy, or heal the party. Morgana can transform into a car as well as utilize wind attacks and AoE healing. The evasive tank that is Yusuke is designed around his countering skill, scoring critical hits and freezing his foes with ice, while Makoto can infuse her punches and kicks with the nuke element and heal, similar to An. Haru's element of choice is psychokinesis while also packing heat in the form of a goddamn grenade launcher. Futaba's role in combat lies in granting the party passive buffs or healing, and lastly, Sophia's game plan involves time button presses that increase the damage of her yo-yo attacks when done properly with healing and debuffs on the side. Individually speaking, each member of the cast is crafted around a specific mix of roles, with some being more useful than others depending on enemy composition that constantly varies. More on that later. It's important to note that magic is tied to SP while physical skills expend HP. Despite this, a majority of magic surprisingly doesn't require SP usage. One smart element of Strikers' design is that magic skills from your personas are built into unlockable combos. For a few examples, An can trigger Matarunda by pressing square then triangle, and Ryuji's electricity can be summoned through square 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 triangle. This concept introduces some great variety mid-combat, especially since the sky's the limit for Joker, given the wild card of being able to switch between personas at any given moment. In a tough situation, there are two routes I can take. Option A. Retreat from danger to burn HP or SP on skills that come out quickly and cover a wide radius, depleting enemy shields faster than regular attacks. Option B. Put yourself in a vulnerable position, pulling off longer combos all to conserve HP or SP. In essence, you can spend your resources for a faster means of damage or place yourself in harm's way to save your resources, and these mechanics do well in preserving the charm of the gameplay. It creates a little risk versus reward system that both benefits the skill of weaving in and out of enemy threat range and committing combo routes to memory. Also, the fact that you can flip between two styles adds active decision making to bosses where conditions such as attack patterns and reinforcements often change. Joker's ability to swap personas only builds off of this, as you could strategize via using someone like Sarasvati's healing or other stronger moves while ignoring the SP compensation. That's not to say you'll be able to skate by without burning any SP though. Ultimately, it is because skirmishes will likely have you spend lots of resources to come out on top that the game allows you to freely switch between party members at all times. I absolutely love this since it fixes a major issue I had with Age of Calamity, being the restrictive mission design. More often than not, the main story maps would force me into playing one or two characters that I did not want to use without a justified narrative reason for doing so. It was genuinely annoying how, given the large scope of that roster and the amount of enjoyable characters, the game made Link mandatory to the extent that they did. This isn't even addressing the missions where playable champions can be visibly seen fighting alongside you, yet instead of the game letting you control multiple characters in a game designed around spreading units across the battlefield as a major premise, they're locked behind crappy AI. In Strikers, however, I can use any combination of 4 characters whenever I want. If a jail is built around ice demons, I can devise my team around that affinity to make my life easier or more challenging. This amount of freedom is much appreciated in granting players the diversity and approaching the challenges of the game in ways that are unique to their discretion, contrary to Final Fantasy XIII where the Crystarium and Paradigm gimmicks made for a stagnant level of progression system until 20 hours in when the game actually opens up. My favorite character to play aside from Joker, who is easily top tier, is Ryuji because of his insane damage output rooted in chargeable moves and severe physical skills. After that is probably Sophia, a mix of fast yo-yo and blessed attacks paired with reliable healing that has saved my ass from seeing the game over screen many a time. On the lower end of the spectrum is An, who is mediocre all around. I found that her damage output for a majority of the game is mediocre until you get Concentrate at level 64, which drains XP like crazy. Panther lacks the AoE healing of Makoto, Sophia, and Morgana, and her debuffs are just okay. Still fun to play as and useful in some situations, no different from everyone else, but easily my least favorite by far. At least it's not Age of Calamity where Impa stands at the pinnacle of the human race and could probably go toe to toe with Goku if she really wanted to. Contrary to the standard Musou game where you're ultimately rewarded for charging and guns blazing, Strikers dances with subtlety in the form of sneaking around. Outside of battles, stealth is required of the player to maneuver around enemy shadows similar to Persona 5. Successful ambushes result in preemptive damage and in more favorable cases an all-out attack. I was heavily on board with this approach to the gameplay, mainly because reckless play being punished meant that I had to be more calculated with my movement. I enjoyed the idea of more thought being demanded of me within the boundaries of combat and outside of it. Preemptive attacks aren't new to video games, but the way the Persona 5 titles handle this pre-battle concept grants a form of satisfaction like no other. Zipping to a nearby lamppost at blinding speed, pouncing on a mannequin only to yank off that mask that hides its monstrous form is such a rewarding introduction that segues into all of these battles. With such a good amount of environmental props to hide behind or on top of, the option of engaging with an advantage or skating past them was entirely up to me. It's far more enjoyable to me than running into an empty field screaming at the top of my lungs Lord Shimura style. He'd be disappointed in me for resorting to such underhanded tactics, but hey, I'm not trying to die. Diving into the actual skirmishes themselves, it's no surprise that circumstances can become chaotic in an instant. With such a large amount of enemies to defeat, character resources such as HP and SP to manage, and particle effects oozing at all angles, I expected the combat to creep into unmanageable territory. Fortunately enough, it didn't, well at least beyond finicky camera panning from time to time. Firstly, Persona Activation allows you to select from a drop-down of skills which not only assists a lot with the conflict at hand through skills that cover a wide radius, but it also freezes time, which is brilliant. Giving the player time to process the current situation before acting is greatly needed in a setting where there are lots of distractions on screen that would normally grow overwhelming if there wasn't any downtime to relax. Pausing covers a similar function, but the difference is that you have no control over your character in that method. In Strikers though, I can reposition myself, check enemy weaknesses, or shift through personas all while still feeling actively engaged in what's going on. The splendor of Strikers would extend to the dynamic level design as well, which fluctuates according to the jail you're in. As I mentioned before, making use of the environment to give your foes that last surprise they've been waiting for serves as a core element of Strikers gameplay. On the battlefield, however, interacting with pieces of your surroundings could be the push you need to persist through these challenges. Objects are often attuned to certain elements like, hilariously enough, riding a skateboard that deals wind damage, psychokinesis-filled energy crystals that burst, structures that can be swung on for major physical hits, and a great deal more that continued granting me breaths of fresh air on my 40-hour playthrough. Some of these can also double as a means to quickly move about the field of battle if you're in danger of dying or want to slide in for a rushdown style of play. The fact that I can interact with the environment to the extent that I can adds so much charm to each and every battle. If I needed fast damage but I didn't want to waste HP on Tempest Slash for example, I could drop a chandelier on a horde of enemies then follow up with an additional onslaught. Your surroundings are greater than simple details that are there to look at and nothing more. Every location having their own frame of unique structures of varying effects provided a layer of wonder to the gameplay where I could not wait to see what I would be able to use next. And I think Striker's variation in its environmental design is indicative of level progression that is well crafted. As expected, the Bestiary in Strikers is insanely loaded, each demon with their own combination of resistances and weaknesses that call for a strike from the appropriate element. Of course this applies to the main party as well. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want to bring Morgana into a brawl with Zionga flying everywhere or demons nullifying wind skills for instance. The direction that jail design takes in Strikers is that if you really wish to leave every battle with your limbs intact and resources to spare, you will give each member of your party time to shine. In Shibuya, enemies are better dealt with by Morgana and An, unlike Sapporo, where Haru is someone you definitely want on the front lines. I found that every Phantom Thief had an element that was really helpful in a specific jail, and depending on my team composition, the game would either be a stroll through the park or a trip through Dante's Inferno. Persona 5 Strikers is awesome, and I'm still giddy over it as I talk about it right now, yet it's important that I address some of its problems. As I transition into my thoughts on the bosses, we'll also be touching up on my major complaints on the metaverse half of this game. Should you approach these fights like a samurai of Tsushima, you will die. Strikers makes damn sure to punish anyone who thinks they'll skate by mashing square as if it's the only button on their controller. Mini-bosses, jail monarchs, and dire shadows are prepared with many potent attacks that'll shred you if you're not careful. However, all of them share one thing in common that inches them closer to the line of monotony, and that's their ridiculous amount of health. I understand that they wanted to have the player expend enough resources to justify it being a boss fight. I'd certainly be disappointed if it ended in 2 seconds, but they are easily the spongiest tanks I've ever come across in a video game, and yes, I've played Nier Automata. Even the greatest sources of damage output you have, most notably the Showtime and all-out attacks, are glorified mosquito bites to these absolute units. Buffs and debuffs alongside exploited weaknesses for constant strikes can slightly combat how lengthy these battles are, but they're not enough. The shock value of a boss manifesting itself loses its charm 3 minutes into the encounter, and at this point I've seen everything it has to offer in terms of attack patterns. The jail monarchs are at least conceptually interesting though. I can appreciate them having different phases that attach welcome layers of adaptation to the fight, contrary to the lock keepers that are all visually the same boring weapon wielding mannequins. Still though, having 20 to 30% less health would be much advised. And while I'm at it, attacks and strikers need to be better telegraphed. Generally speaking, the atmosphere is chaotic. In the setting that is a Musou game, there is obviously a lot going on. Just as strikers make sure to alert me for a baton pass or one more, there should likewise be prominent audio or visual cues for incoming attacks. A majority of bosses in this game randomly lunge at you for half of your health, and it's seriously annoying. See how in Bayonetta there's always a flash of yellow and a shine sound before an enemy attacks? This is for you to be able to react and punish accordingly. There are indeed enemies and strikers that telegraph their moves, but there are quite a few that could use touching up in that regard. Secondly, progression early game is bloated with tutorials and cutscenes. Every time you suffer a status effect, switch characters, or literally anything at all, a screen pops up explaining it to you. Although I can appreciate strikers educating me on how it works, I really do not need a 3-page screen telling me I'm frozen when I'm prompted to spin the control stick as my character is encased in ice. Throughout the game are checkpoints that grant you the leeway to save or exit to recover your HP and SP. They're fairly placed throughout the jails, where reaching one while you're exhausted of resources provides a welcome level of relief. However, if I can leave to patch up my party and return with no consequences, then why not just have an auto heal feature at the checkpoint? In this case, time is saved as you wouldn't have to sit through 2 loading screens just to warp back to the exact same point you were at before. I didn't think it was that bad at first, but over 40 minutes of experiencing that initial minor annoyance, it builds up, even with the quick load times on the PS5. Alongside the events of the main story are side quests that are always appreciated as they allow the player to disconnect from the events of the main story and move at their own pace. Sadly, requests boil down to generic missions like backtrack through an entire jail without being seen, or look for this item hidden here, which is a shame because the potential to build up upon the nuance of this game's world was there. I would have liked to see more involved activities where we interacted with the people who had their desires stolen, or other things that would have further highlighted the themes of trauma and rehabilitation through confiding in those around you that strikers pushed a lot. Neat benefits such as a wider variety of items in store or access to formidable personas are there for those who want to commit to them, but I just wasn't strong enough to sit through recycled jail monarch boss fights with those ludicrous amounts of health. On that note, strikers made a few welcome and annoying changes to the Velvet Room. I like how you can use persona points to raise their level or individual stats, but I hate how fusing a new demon requires its supplements to be a certain level. For example, I wanted to fuse Black Frost, right? In Persona 5, I could just fuse King Frost, Jack Frost, and Jack-o'-lantern. That's fine because those 3 are easy to find. In Strikers, the same demons are required, except there are level requirements now, which makes it a grind fest. For the tougher endgame bosses, it's ridiculously tedious trying to fuse Black Frost, Seth, Cerberus, etc. There's an exploit you can do where deleting demons will get you persona points which you can use to level up other demons, then you can buy back the deleted demons through the compendium. It's still a crazy expensive grind that I did not feel like entertaining. Transitioning back to a positive outlook on this game, I'll say that while I thoroughly enjoyed my time with the frenzied, action-filled jail progression, I felt that the real-world half of Strikers was equally as compelling, even if for drastically different reasons. It involves light exploration throughout many locations, probably my favorite part of Strikers honestly. What I loved about the world design of the Persona 5 games is that you can really feel the sense of scale that comes from each of the major cities. It could be NPCs walking back and forth from work, strangers commenting on the conflict at hand, memorable landmarks, or the amount of location-specific stores, which is insane. All of them are stocked with various foods of Japanese culture like yakisoba, gyutan stew, jinkisukan, or Okinawa soba. I love that the shops had finite portions of products that restock after time spent in the jails because it's far more believable than stores having upwards of hundreds of gear for you to buy at a moment's notice. I'm not saying that every game has to take this approach because it can screw with balance, but this was something that made Strikers way more immersive for me. Walking up to buy 2 plates of curry would have the food stand sold out, for example, and as I burned time in the metaverse, another batch would be cooked up. My only issue though is that most foods have the same effects in battle, so it's easy for your inventory to get bloated with items of identical functionality, which can get kind of annoying. Additionally, the cast of characters can be seen at a plethora of locations. It's nice to see them naturally hanging out, taking in the sights of Okinawa or Sendai, available for you to talk to them. If you see a friend, chat with them. All of their different reactions are a joy to read. Also, you never know if an item or side quest might be given as a reward, you know? On that note, I liked how captivating the setting was, but I really wish there was more to do in terms of interactions. The confidant system was a big piece of Persona 5's social design that I adored, and the small amount of opportunities to hang out with individual party members left me disappointed. I understand that P5 was longer, paving the way for more side activities, but I can't help but feel they could have done more with Strikers in this regard. Second or third tier personas are likewise nowhere to be seen, which is a letdown as well. What's even more saddening is the fact that there are times in shops where if you buy a recipe, characters will show up out of nowhere to talk to you. Seriously, the developers couldn't even animate a short cutscene or at the very least have the character's model stand next to me so I can actually feel like they're there. These interactions reek of last minute additions to me. Regardless of my gripes though, real-world exploration in Strikers is still great, offering a deeper dive into many flavors of Japanese culture and tradition in a way that screams inspiration along with character and NPC dialogue that provides welcome world building. Next up on today's agenda is to briefly cover my thoughts on the narrative and its newly introduced characters. The events of Strikers kick off as Joker returns to the LeBlanc Cafe following the events of Persona 5. The crew celebrates his arrival and arranges plans for how they'll spend the blisteringly hot days of summer vacation, only for the topic of Emma, a popular phone application on the rise within Japan, to surface in conversation. The thieves think of it as a surprisingly quick and accurate source of information and nothing more, that is until Joker, Ryuji, and Morgana meet celebrity Alice Hiragi during a session shopping for goods planned for a group cookout. The idol hands them a slip of paper with the keyword to add her on, and when the boys accidentally announce this keyword in front of Emma, they find themselves forcefully shifted into the metaverse. Understandably confused already, they discover that the humans here are the same ones that added Alice through the keyword she provided. This is where their desires are stolen by shadows with rippling effects on their psyche in the real world, turning them into drones who are mindlessly obsessed with Alice. Some guys ditch their lovers for her, exhaust their money buying her merchandise, and die-hard fans will even assault anyone who even dares criticize their beloved fashion star. After getting captured by Shadow Alice, Joker, Ryuji, and Morgana escape following a trip to the sewers and alert the rest of the thieves of what's going on. It is here where the true summer vacation begins. Arriving at a location, finding out there's a jail monarch who is manipulating the civilians to their own selfish benefit, gathering the intel needed to secure a keyword to enter their jail, and eventually changing their hearts through beating them half to death. Accompanying them through their ordeals are Zenkichi and Sophia. Zenkichi is a public security officer. One look at his formal appearance, broken by sneakers, gives off the impression of someone who isn't like the rest, and that he is. Zenkichi is tasked with investigating the Phantom Thieves, as the higher-ups suspect that they're the ones causing the societal outrages when in actuality it's the jail monarch stealing desires. Zenkichi easily carries this game's stories, with multiple layers of his character being explored through interactions with the thieves. On one hand, he functions as comic relief as the group calls him Gramps and treats him like a washed-up cop, only for his facade as cool adult to fade, revealing his sensitive side. Any cutscene with Zenkichi was guaranteed to be funny, as his dynamics with the thieves are so well done that I could not hold back a laugh anytime he appeared on screen. Looking beyond that, he's roped into a situation where his time with the thieves has grown him attached to them. However, he has to be reminded to emotionally distance himself because they are suspects to be detained once he gathers the evidence to arrest them. I found that Strikers did a great job illustrating his genuine connection to the group, conflicting with the idea of betrayal that comes with seeing his mission through to the end, which really pushes his character arc. This even extends into mid-game, where it's revealed that he has deep-seated insecurities rooted in family issues that gnaw at the man day after day, and I genuinely enjoyed seeing him evolve past his insecurities as the thieves assisted him through his issues. Whether it's through comedy or moments of genuine sadness, Zenkeishi is a character that I found myself rooting for throughout the entirety of Strikers. There's a level of satisfaction that comes with having the entire arc of an already lovable character unfold in the palm of your hands, and as far as I'm concerned, Zenkeishi is Striker's biggest win writing-wise. Sophia, on the other hand, is an AI found by Joker, Ryuji, and Morgana shortly after they were dumped into a sewer system by Alice Hiragi. In the metaverse, she has a tangible body, but in the real world, she's trapped within the boundaries of Joker's phone. Sophia does a lot of things, from scouting on jails and knowing almost everything when the plot calls for it. It takes a crazy amount of suspension of disbelief to buy into the idea that she can order anything on an online market and have it shipped to the crew in minutes, especially when the thieves are constantly traveling. But I'll let it slide because I would not survive the bosses without those SP restoratives. At first I couldn't tolerate Sophie because every line was the same, "I am humanity's companion," like a drone on repeat, but they take a Persona 3 Aiga's route with her where her journey with humans would, well, humanize her. Listening to the backstories of jail monarchs would teach her the values of emotion like sadness or anger and how these feelings can be interconnected in certain situations. For example, if someone insulted you, it'd make you feel sad, naturally. However, a friend getting angry at that person on your behalf would make you happy. Sophia picking up on these traits through story events and questioning whether she'll truly have a human heart really made me feel sorry for this character. Sophia's frustrations are defined by not having the answers to everything despite being a computer designed to have limitless knowledge, and that, to me, is an irony that presents itself as saddening yet compelling at the same time. Similar to Zenkichi, I was happy to see her discover her own sense of purpose in life and contribute to the narrative in interesting ways. Although I loved how they handled the protagonists, I can't say the same for the villains. What I don't like about Strikers' story lies partly in the jail progression. In most cases, you'll find out there's a monarch, investigate in the real world, and then dive into the metaverse to confront their shadow form. That's all cool and good. The issue is that during most of the time in jails, the characters do not interact with the villains, and it's because of this that we miss out on much needed gradual development between them. Remember when plot points surrounding Kamoshida and Futaba were uncovered as you explored their cognitive realms? That kind of storytelling serves to build up your hatred or empathy towards a given character, and it feels natural. Bits and pieces of information being given to the player is easier to remember without being forced to sit through a boring 20-minute cutscene. With the way Strikers tackles this, it comes off as trite monologuing for me because these moments of finally confronting most of these villains could have and should have been heartfelt. Even an actual flashback for Alice Hiragi, for example, would have been much advised, and I'm talking about a scene where I can actually see her reaction to what's going on as opposed to her high school bullies talking into a void while the Phantom Thieves watch. However, if there's one thing about Strikers' narrative that I loved, it's the fact that the members of the main cast receive more time in the spotlight. This comes in the form of An relating to Alice, who was likewise a target for harassment at Shujin Academy, Yusuke defending his mother's last piece of artwork in the face of a prick degrading it, or exploring sides of deep-seated regrets within Haru that weren't fleshed out in the main story of Persona 5. I feel like they could have done more with each character's involvement, which would have been the case if there were more short bits of dialogue during the jail raid as opposed to the exposition dump at the end. In fact, more conversations between the thieves and the jail monarch occurred during the actual fight. This is ludicrous in itself because A, I'm way too focused on the chaos of the battle to read dialogue at the top right corner of the screen, and B, their voices are so low to the point where I can't make out any of what's being said over the absolute warfare that's going on. The English dub of Strikers already has an issue where the voice acting is fine, but the quality is all over the place. For me, it's justified because I'm just a 19-year-old dude recording mediocre videos that can't even top 150 views, but for a licensed game it feels off. Characters' words fade away as if their equipment isn't catching their voice, and other times they'll scream into the mic. It happens far too often to ignore. Regardless of what complications went on behind the scenes, it's weird, but it's not a deal breaker per se, and it doesn't take away from the main messages the game is trying to communicate. The journey of Strikers is a commentary on how people of varying backgrounds process trauma. Some Phantom Thieves experienced this, whether it was the death of someone close to them or being degraded by those around them for being simply different. However, they received the rehabilitation they needed to overcome their problems, and that was through friendship. Who knows how far Ryuji's short-tempered behavior would have resulted in if he didn't meet Joker and form that plan to overcome Kamoshida, and what Futaba's growing void of depression could have ended with. There were people around them that accepted them for who they were, saving them from a dark place in their lives and eventually making an alliance that would help other suffering individuals through their own respective traumas. The villains here, however, were not granted those same luxuries. Constant neglect from society would push them deeper into their shell of hatred. Once the opportunity to get their payback surfaces, they take it and relish in it, manipulating others to suffice for how they were stepped on in their past months or years. At its core, trauma is a detrimental force in one's life, and Strikers paints it as something that can keep someone locked away like a bird in a cage. Running away from these sources of trepidation seemed ideal for these people because being far away from what stresses you out can grant you a sense of solace. In actuality though, that temporary escape only makes things worse because the gravity of whatever is plaguing you will only increase if you fail to address it. Strikers implies that we can be the hero of our own narrative, breaking free of those shackles by facing adversity head-on no matter how long it takes to cope. As humans, we're not perfect beings, but it's our reaction within the face of conflict that defines who we are. The way to move forward in life is not to dance around issues hoping it'll go away, but having the courage to approach it head-on. It is through this method that we become stronger as people. We become the key that sets ourselves free from these shackles of insecurities and negativity, and we can even inspire others to undergo their own adventure of self-growth. This commentary on trauma and its effects on the mentalities of teenagers and adults alike is simple, yet it's applicable to all of our lives all the same, even if the delivery of this message from villain to villain varied in impact. I thoroughly enjoyed seeing the story to the end, and I think that's in part due to how immersive the atmosphere was. There are 3 realms that you're constantly shifting between: the real world, the metaverse, and the Velvet Room. All of them invoke different emotions in me, and it kept me hooked all the way through. The real world, as I've described before, fascinated me through its attention to detail in its world design. To combat the issue of monarchs exploiting the masses, the thieves are constantly on the move. This means that after every arc is an entirely new town to explore with characters that make the adventure all the more enjoyable. I love sitting through these car rides where the cast complains about the heat or takes food breaks to stuff their faces with curry. Breaks like that work wonders in providing me time to kick back and relax following a stressful boss fight. With the cast traveling non-stop comes new locations to explore along with memories to be had, whether it's a festival celebration or a trip to the beach. The long journey narrative direction got me attached to these characters. I wanted to see the foods they'd try next, what the next city would look like, and how they'd spend the rest of their summer vacation as dreaded school inched by closer day after day. The real world of Strikers invoked happiness and laughter in ways that made me feel kind of bittersweet when it ended. On the flip side, the metaverse features a distorted atmosphere of interesting color schemes. There's a sense of uneasiness that comes with exploring someone's subconscious where there are monsters that'll lock you up at a moment's notice. The chaotic nature of this realm, ranging from the jail's makeup to the demons that roam here to the warrior styles fights, which are pretty self-explanatory, the gameplay here is cathartic. All of it gave me a rush that made the game so satisfying to play, so much so that I find myself going back to it every now and then after completion. Lastly, the Velvet Room, where a requiem plays in the background. The music can be best described as melancholic, as if the idea of sacrificing demons who have helped you up to that point is an act worthy of mourning, yet the singer's voice takes on a crescendo which signifies something good coming from that. It's important to realize that with sacrifice comes change in the form of stronger demons or a better set of skills at your disposal, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is the poem for everyone's souls. Looking back on what I adored about Strikers, I can say that I really did have an amazing time with it. The gameplay, although padded with damaged sponge bosses and some unfair attack patterns, was great. An interactable environment and team composition that I could adjust whenever I wanted to created a level of freedom that elevated the combat to greatness. The storyline introduced likable characters in Zenkichi and Sophia, as well as reviewing various people's responses to trauma in life. It could have written its villain arcs and even the ending sequence a lot better, but I still felt like I emerged with a solid grasp of the themes it was trying to relay. What's most important though is the contrast between the real world and the metaverse. The constant transitions between the down-to-earth nature of Japan and the distortions of the cognitive realm had me hooked the entire way through, similar to other Persona games. Although different in atmosphere, they share one thing I love: the instrumentals. Persona 5's music as a whole is a contemporary take on jazz, where instruments like the organ, pianos, drums, and horns see widespread usage in crafting an amazing soundtrack that tugs at the strings, pun intended. Just to name a few, Alley Cat paints a scene of sadness, Beneath the Mask captures the subtlety of one's true self being concealed behind a mask, and Sophia's shop has just the right amount of jazzy energy packed in that adds a layer of fun to a shopping spree. Furthermore, lead singer Lin Inazumi is a key factor in invoking that feeling of empowerment in songs like Life Will Change or What You Wish For. Without that blessed voice, I doubt any of her songs would have anywhere near the same impact. All in all, Persona 5 Strikers was an adventure that made my summer all the better. I grew attached with its gameplay, atmosphere, music, world design, and so many more highs that contributed to my love for it. I understand that the Musou genre isn't for everyone, but if you're a fan of Persona 5 or are just looking for a chill game to immerse yourself in, I'd recommend Strikers. But it's a distinctive take on warrior-styled games from my experience, had me well occupied for 40 hours of fun-filled skirmishes with hordes of enemies. Although I can't really comment on the Switch version's performance, I can say that playing PS4 Strikers on the PS5 had literally 0 frame drops or performance issues, plus quick load times, which is to be expected given the console's specs. If you have the choice between the Switch and the PS4 version, I'd go with the PS4, especially since it's easier to record footage, and coming from me, I really do not trust anything that runs on the Switch. You can probably find more in-depth videos that draw comparisons between different consoles running Strikers if you're interested in it though. Alright, that's all the time I've got. I've got to get back to playing Guilty Gear Strive on my PlayStation 5.